Do you know why you loved your favorite band, or why you loved your favorite photographer, or why you loved your favorite painter, or whoever? It's because they have a style that you enjoy. They do that style, they do that thing they do in a way that only they can do it, and they do it really well. Ask yourself, with your photography, are you doing that? Are you creating a style that is uniquely yours? Are you capturing something that few others capture in the way that you capture it? You need to think of yourself as a storyteller and not a photographer. You're telling stories through your images, especially in post-processing. That is really where your style comes to life. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through a 5-step process that you should go through every time before you start processing your images. 5 steps that at first you need to do very consciously, very mindfully. Ask yourself these questions out loud, and eventually it will just be innate in you. And this is going to help you find your voice. This is going to help you become the storyteller you need to be as a photographer. So with that, let's get into it. So here we are in Lightroom as always, guys. The first thing, the very first step is always going to be, in my opinion, create a balanced exposure. Before you actually start processing your image for taste, just get it set up where the exposure is balanced. And what I mean by that is you want enough information in your foreground and in your sky where the scene looks like it has all the information it's going to need. I'll show you what I mean by that. First thing I'm going to do is pull my shadows up because they're a bit too dark, and now I have a lot more information down here in my foreground. I'm also always going to turn on my clipping to make sure I'm not clipping anywhere. I'm going to bring the highlights down, but I don't really want to bring them down too much globally. I want to throw on a graduated filter and mostly stick to bringing down the highlights in the sky because that's where it's too bright. In the foreground, I don't need to bring down the highlights at all anymore. And then it's going to be kind of a matter of bumping up the exposure, the whites, the blacks. Just these first, this top bit of sliders here is where we're going to spend most of our time. So I'm going to bring up the whites, and I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit overall, bring down the highlights a little bit, and that's about right. So that's always going to be step one, and the reason it's important to set a balanced exposure first is you know what information you have available, how much you can stretch and pull this photo in terms of what your camera was able to capture. Allow yourself to look at the photo and see it in a very natural way because that's going to take us into step 2. Step 2, describe your photo to a blind person. What do you see in this photo? So for example, if I was to describe this to a blind person, I would say, well, let's see, it's a gorgeous tropical beach at sunset with this really nice sun star just peeking over the horizon of what looks like a cresting wave. And there's a wave that's incoming. It's already smashing against some rocks, but at the same time, there's a tide receding. So there's water kind of coming in and out, and it's creating this really neat sunset symphony. I don't know how else to describe it. That would be my words to describe to a blind person. So step 3 is going to be reflect on your story. And what I mean by that is, what was the first thing I mentioned? Do you recall? It was the setting, a tropical beach, okay. And then I went into the sunset. And the reason for that is because my eyes are drawn to the brightest part of the image and the most heavily weighted part of the image. So if we look at our photo with grid lines, the center commands the most visual weight, followed by the points and the lines of our thirds. So these corners are where the least amount of visual weight occur, which is why you want to put the most interesting things along your third lines. So my eyes were drawn to the brightest part of the image by default, and especially the center of the image. So the first thing I noticed was a gorgeous sunset. And then I went on to talk about this wave that was crashing in and how it was crashing against the rocks. And then I went on to describe the way that a previous wave, that the tide was receding back into the ocean, so that there was this juxtaposition of the water coming in and going out. So if I think about that for a second, I'm going to ask myself, what do I like about that then? It's those things I mentioned. Those are the features of the photo. I need to enhance my features, and I want to minimize my distractions, right? So what did I notice? I noticed the sunset, the waves, the crashing, and this receding water. That's going to be my focus. When I start to process this image, it's going to be with those things in mind and trying to make those the most noticeable, impactful things in this photo. So that's step 3, reflecting on what you said, and it's going to take us naturally into step 4. What's the mood you hope to create? You need to say that out loud in the beginning. You're still discovering your style. There's a lot of ways this photo could be processed and look great. I could go for a very soft, ethereal, dreamlike look where I lower the clarity and boost the exposure and create like a nice, soft, golden light. I could do that. Obviously, I would need a bit more time than I just took, but I could make it soft and dreamy, or I could make it the opposite. I could make it really dramatic. I could up the clarity a bunch and have a huge vignette and really make this kind of a savage, dramatic version. Whoops, let's invert that. So there, with a few clicks, that's dramatic to me. It's very different from the feeling I created when I went soft with it, right? And there's 1,000 variations in between. Obviously, there's also black and white and all sorts of stuff like that you can do. You need to be intentional with that. To craft your style, you're going to need to know what you like, what type of imagery makes you feel evocative, and shoot for that every time. Now, it's okay to also process in different ways for different purposes. I have several variations of this photo, but you should know on this particular edit, before you start processing, what is my goal on this occasion? And that takes us away to step number 5, which is explain the visual journey that your viewer is about to go on. So, in this case, the visual journey, I want you to follow this leading line, which is the tide sort of receding, and even this bit a little bit as well. They're all sort of bringing you into the center, where you're going to be held captive by this wave and this sun. I also really like the way the water was crashed on the sides, so that's going to be part of the visual journey as well. But the main journey is going to be follow the lines to the water and get held captive here in this dreamy, ethereal, dramatic sunset. That's going to be my goal. So at this point, those are the 5 steps. You can stop this video now if you want to go practice on your own, but I'm going to show you how I would process this image following those 5 steps, all right? First thing I'm going to do is use a radial filter, and I'm going to make this leading line a lot more obvious. So areas of contrast will attract attention. One of my favorite ways to create that is boosting whites and decreasing blacks, and also the clarity will help define hard lines. I'm going to do a similar thing over here. Now you could do this with a brush, you could do this with a radial. I work a lot with radials. I find that they create directional light very well. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing, just increase the whites and the clarity here. And that's made those leading lines already a lot more effective in bringing us out to sea. And you might do this differently, that's completely fine, but that's where I'm going to start. Step 2, I want to hold you captive here, is what I said. I also want to bring out some of the wave action here. So the way I'm going to hold you captive in the middle is, again, a radial filter. I'm going to increase the exposure. Our eyes are drawn to the brightest part of the image. I'm going to go until I start to see that is clipping a little bit, and then I'm just going to dial back the highlights just enough to make sure they don't clip. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I want this wave that's got some nice aqua in there. I'm going to do the same thing there. I'm going to really bring out the aqua and the detail on that. And I'm going to brush outwards, kind of affecting our sun. I don't want it there. And then conversely, I've made this a bit brighter. I want to make the rest of it darker, but mostly the sky, because part of the visual journey we declared was these lines. So I don't want to make those too dark, or we'll have lost that element of the visual journey again. So another radial filter, I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to now decrease the exposure from the sky. I don't want you spending too much time here. That sky is meant to be complementary to the story. You shouldn't be scanning that too much. It should all just take you through, keep you captive here. And I think making that darker, maybe adding a bit of contrast, yeah, that does a good job, an effective job of that. Now, obviously, we've kind of crept in. The whole image feels a little bit darker, so that's why starting with the balanced exposure is good. I'm going to start to creep back up a bit. And there's no hard and fast rule. I'm doing this to taste. If I bring my shadows up a little bit, I like that as well. And I think what I'm going to do is lower the exposure on just these rocks on the outside. Those are not of interest to me. It's fine that they're there. I like the lava rock, but they don't need to shine. They can be dark. They're meant to be dark. But conversely, this wave action needs to be brought out. So I'm going to use a brush, and I'm going to just sort of brush along that wave action. Okay, and then we're going to bring out this wave action a bit as well. We're just kind of making sure that it's bright all the way across this wave, but I definitely want the brightest part to be the center. I hope that made sense to everyone, and I know it's going to help you hone your craft. I know it's going to help you find your style, because it helped me find my style, and I didn't make this up. I learned bits and pieces from a lot of people, and I sort of developed this process. Whenever I heard something I liked, I made a note of it. I did it until it was second nature, and now I don't have to go through this so consciously every time. But I still go through that process subconsciously every time I work on a photo. So do yourself a favor, try applying this to the next photo you edit, maybe the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and eventually you will just have your own natural style developing. Your storytelling will become better. You'll have your own voice. Everything's going to take off from there. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more of my workflow videos, I'm going to link them somewhere around here. Otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.